There are two areas in poker where somebody could improve very rapidly with next to no work. And these spots come up all the time, especially in live poker, but in both online and live, as you will see. And they are pre-flop play and multi-way. These are two of the areas where players consistently make mistakes, blunders that are just low-hanging fruit that you can clean up once you know what to look for. Watch this video as I break down 5 online poker hands that will help you sharpen your pre-flop and multi-way game. All right, so the first way to rapidly improve your poker game is to improve your pre-flop skills. Many players go wrong by being just way too loose and passive pre-flop. I'm going to show you 2 hands where a tight, aggressive approach really is profitable and can help you win some extra pots. So this first hand, we have King of Diamonds, Queen of Diamonds. We are in the cutoff and we open to standard 2.5x in a straddled game. And the button thinks for a little bit, decides to 3-bet us to 18. And the player is a fairly tight player. I checked their stats right away. This is a clear, tight, aggressive player. And they're an aware player. They seem like to know what they're doing and to make pretty sensible plays post-flop. But the fact that it's a straddled game, they're on the button, they are heavily incentivized to 3-bet with 3 players left to act behind them. So I don't think they're overly loose here, but I do think this can be a range of maybe 10 to even 15% of hands and isn't just the nuts. So my hand is performing just fine here. Then we get the cold call from the big blind. And normally when you see this, it's a recreational player that isn't too up on poker theory or is just being a little bit undisciplined here, because most of the time when a player does this, they have a very capped range and they're not closing the action. So this player will usually have things like medium pairs, maybe ace queen, maybe some suited Broadway hands, the occasional suited ace or suited connector. What does all of that range have in common? It all hates seeing a 4-bet from the player that's still left to act behind them, which is me. So with the extra dead money in this pot, I decide to go to a 3.5x 4-bet. I don't need to go huge. Stacks really aren't that deep right now. I really can effectively threaten stacks by going to 65 here. Basically, asking the button, do you want to play for stacks or not? And my thinking was actually if the button shoved all in, and I was getting like 2-1, I might actually fold to the button in this spot. They do wind up folding, fortunately, but if they had gone all in, I think I might have folded given that the button is fairly tight, fairly aware, and still has an uncapped range when they 3-bet me. However, if the big blind had gone all in, I definitely would have called here. The big blind can have way too many medium pairs. If we do run into ace queen, it's kind of just a bad beat for this price. And a lot of the time, we're going to be up against a player that just kind of wants to gamble with a suited connector, a suited ace, a medium pair, doesn't want to fold, and our hand has enough equity to continue at that price. So it's a nice spot to take down about $40 in dead money without seeing a flop, rake free. Definitely a nice boost to your win rate in a spot where calling could have been okay, but I really do think 4-betting is the superior play here. So another hand that can help you sharpen your pre-flop game is this one right here where we have ace-king offsuit in the big blind. It gets a little bit weird because the first act player raises to 6.5x, an unusually large open size, and then there's a call by the small blind. So the small blind probably shouldn't be flatting in this spot, and even less so after we look at what the stats are for the first act player. This player is playing over 60% of hands. They're raising 27%. They are a certified maniac and are opening way too wide. So what are you signifying when you flat a raise of a player this wide? You're basically saying my hand is extremely capped. I wasn't even strong enough to raise a range this wide, and you leave yourself very vulnerable to squeezes from behind from players like me. So the small blind is clearly making an error here unless they have some devious plan to back raise. I don't think that's the case though. I think they were just being a little bit sloppy. They call, and now it's on me. And of course I'm going to be re-raising here. My hand obviously performs extremely well against a range this wide from the maniac and the capped flatting range. Now it's a little awkward though because stacks are not that deep. I only have $190, like 95 big blinds here, and the player just went to 6.5x. So I could go to 65 here. That'd be my standard 3-bet. going 4x plus 1x for the caller being out of position. So essentially going 13 times 5 for 65. But I think this just leaves me in a really uncomfortable, awkward spot post flop if I'm called. It basically sets up a situation where the stack to pot ratio will be 1. The pot will be 130, the stack will be roughly 130, and my hand is basically committed on any flop, right? And now I'm out of position, and it's like if I'm committed on any flop anyways, why not get the money in now for extra fold equity, see all 5 cards, and potentially even get called by worse hands by players this wide. So I do decide to rip it in. It seems a little bit excessive until you back up and realize the situation we're actually in. This is not 95 big blinds being ripped in. Once the player opens to 6.5x from early position, really it's as though the big blind amount has shifted to like more than $4 here. Because if we think about a 3x open size, what would the X be? The X would be roughly $4.33 is the new big blind that we're playing here once the player goes to this size. So basically, I only have about 40 big blinds. And so it's no longer that crazy to rip in ace king for 40 bigs from out of position in a spot with a ton of dead money to be made. That's exactly what I decided to do here. Do take it down, win about $30 of dead money, which is nothing to sneeze at in a 1-2 game. Always happy to take down 15 bigs without any rake and without a fight post-flop. Now, playing a strong, tight, aggressive game pre-flop really does set us up for profitable post-flop decisions. And in a loose, splashy game, what are the post-flop scenarios we are likeliest to see? Usually they occur in multi-way pots. And players make tons of mistakes in these pots, as I'm going to show you in the next 2 hands. So I open ace-8 offsuit on the button to my standard 2.5x here, and I wind up getting 3 callers. Just shows you what type of game I'm in. Pretty loose, splashy game. And sure enough, we get a beautiful flop. Ace of hearts, 9 of hearts, 8 of spades. I have top and bottom pair. Huge hand, especially against ranges this wide. And of course, I'm going to be going for some value when it checks to me. I think on a board this wet and connected from in position, I actually can size up a little bit. And normally my multi-way sizing would be around 1/3 pot in a lot of scenarios. But from in position in a spot like this, where I don't think players are going to fold like an ace or a good draw for a little bit more money, I decide to just size up a little. I go to 1/2. And I wind up getting 3 callers somehow. As soon as I get 3 callers, and the calls all come in fairly quickly, I'm fairly certain that nobody has 2 pair or better out in the field. I think somebody would have at least considered raising or made a slower call or just done something different if they had a hand that strong on a board this wet and connected from out of position. So what types of hands do these players often have? A lot of ace-x that's like maybe a weakish kicker that didn't feel comfortable raising, a lot of 9x, and a lot of draws, especially for the players that overcalled, right? That first player who calls has to have a stronger range from the small blind because they have 2 players left to act behind them. Now, once they call, it's really not that profitable for these remaining players to be calling with like a 9. So the player in the big blind or the straddle really ought to be weighted towards ace-x or very good draws like open-enders, flush draws, and the occasional like gut shot with a backdoor. So that alerts me to like the completing cards are going to be very dangerous when we have 3 callers like this. And sure enough, that's what we get. We get the Queen of Hearts turn, and it checks to me. And now I have to recognize that both the flush has completed and the primary straight Jack 10 is completed on this card. And I certainly do not want to reopen the action here. I do have a weak flush draw. I do have 4 outs to a boat, but against 3 players, I'm almost certainly behind right now. And I want to take a free card, so I check back. The river comes in and it's 5 of diamonds. Seems like a brick, although even now 6-7 gets there as well. Every flush got there. It checks over to the straddle, who now bets 3/4 pot. And so I need to win this bet around 30% of the time to call here. How many of you would make this call because you have 2 pair? Because you have a blocker to the flush? You find some justification. The guy's in stealing position because he's the last one to act before you. All these bogus reasons, this needs to be a fold unless you have some sort of very specific player read on this player and you have a real read on the player's left act behind you that they just have no engagement in the hand and they appear to be like ready to check fold. Right? Like in an online poker, we of course don't have those types of reads. It's just way too easy for this player to have a flush, to have Jack 10, to even have 6-7. How do they have a bluff overcalling the flop and then getting this particular run out, right? Like they'd have to overcall the flop with something very, very marginal and very weak that they shouldn't be in order to arrive in this spot with enough bluffs. So I make the clear fold, not closing the action, and definitely going to sleep easy with this one, and you should too in your games. All right, so here is a second hand that highlights mistakes that are made in multi-way pots. So we get the limp from the cutoff, definitely not something you want to be doing from the cutoff, should be playing raise or fold from this spot. And I have Jack 9 offsuit on the button. It's a little bit marginal to raise a limper here. I certainly would open this if it folded to me. I think against a limper, this is like, it could go either way. I could fold, I could raise. I think in a tougher game, I might just fold here, but these players have been making a decent amount of mistakes, and I want to play pots in position against them, so I go to 7. Unfortunately, I do get 3 callers again. Very loose, splashy game, and maybe I should be tightening up even more because my pre-flop bets are just not getting through. And the flop is 9 of clubs, 8 of clubs, 4 of clubs, monotone board. So take a pause for 1 second and consider, how excited are you about your hand in my spot with top pair marginal kicker here? If you are excited, definitely tone that down. This is a spot to have like extreme caution, maybe a slight optimism if it checks around, but you really don't want to see a lot of money go into this pot if you're going to be playing this hand. And unfortunately, we see the lead from the big blind. The big blind leads for 18, a little more than half pot, pretty big size actually for this board where a lot of bets tend to be smaller on a monotone board in theory, usually more like 1/3 pot. And then we see the straddle makes a call, not closing the action. So this is a spot where our hand is just not performing well at all against a range that bets into 3 people from out of position, and then another range that calls, not closing the action. Even in the very best case scenario, where the initial bettor has like a weaker 9 than ours and the caller just has a flush draw, we're still going to lose that pot like 60% of the time. And that's in the best case scenario. Most of the time, we're just absolutely crushed here. We could be drawing dead. How many of you would overcall this flop with the reasoning that, oh, I have top pair? This reasoning is not good enough in a multi-way pot. Anytime the action goes bet call like this on a board where your hand really can't improve, you're very easily outkicked. You could be drawing dead to a set or a flush. This has to be a fold here, and you can rest assured that you are not giving up any EV. In fact, you are dumping EV into the toilet if you overcall here. As played, we do fold, and you'll see how the action escalates even on a fairly blank runout. On the 8 of spades, are we even feeling that great about our hand? There are so few turns where we're going to like any action happening in front of us. And as played, it's almost certain that the player in the straddle had flopped a really big hand or turned an 8. They decide to go for value, and our hand clearly could not have held on here. My estimation is that on the flop against these ranges, assuming like a fairly reasonable betting range, and a calling range that's like mostly 9x, some 8x, and flush draws, we might have about 10% equity in this spot. Time to just save your money, move on to the next hand. So the common theme we see over and over again in multi-way pots is that when you have a bluff catcher hand like this, and there is a bet and a call in front of you, and your hand has very little chance to improve, you really just need to fold. You're not giving up anything. And it's the type of fold that most players are not finding multi-way that they should be finding. So this next hand really puts all the pieces together. It combines some of the elements that we talked about in both the pre-flop section and the multi-way section. We have pocket 10s on the button, and there is a limp and then a small open in front of us. Doesn't really seem to be factoring in the limp size and goes small with raise to 6. And it's a spot where my hand certainly could 3-bet, and that might be the default on the button in a straddled game with this many players left act behind me. But I did look at the stats of the open raiser, and they're only raising with 8% of hands. So even though they're playing 28%, this is a very passive player, and their open raise signifies more strength than a normal open raise does. So I want to be a bit cautious with my hand. I really don't want to just get all in against this player where my hand is not performing that well against this tight of a range. And I decided to just flat. One of the other things I have in mind is that if a player squeezes behind me, and there are some very loose, aggressive players behind, and the preflop raiser folds, it could create a very profitable opportunity for me with a fairly disguised hand, given that I just flatted preflop. Sure enough, that is what happens. So I make the call, and then our friend over here in the straddle with a 45% VPIP, a 16% PFR, squeezes to 24, and fortunately for us, the tight preflop raiser gets out of the way. So now I'm fairly confident that I have the best hand because the player in this spot is squeezing so wide. I've seen them do this multiple times. I mean, it is possible they have a pair bigger than mine, but they're making this play with many other hands too, like weaker pairs than mine, Broadway cards like ace queen, ace king, other suited Broadway cards. They could even be doing this with a low suited ace or a suited connector. So I think this player could have, up to 15% of hands in this squeeze spot. I think they're fairly wide. And my hand is certainly good enough to just get it in here. However, unlike in the example where I had ace king preflop, here I am in position. And this is a time where I'd rather see a flop with the advantage in my favor and see if my opponent makes some post-flop mistakes in the form of either a bluffing mistake or maybe overplaying his hand. So I decide to make the call, and we get a low board. We get the deuce of hearts, deuce of spades, three of spades board. And now my opponent surprises me by insta-ripping 2.5x into me. So this is a spot where it's easy to get tripped up and just think about the 24 combos that are beating us, like jacks, queens, kings, aces, and think that, oh, we're drawing fairly thin. You can also get lost in the fact that we have the 10 of spades, which isn't that great to have here. We'd rather our opponent have that card so that maybe he's doing this with like a flush draw, like a 9-10 of spades or an ace-10 of spades potentially. So you can get lost in details like that, and you can forget how wide we gave this player for his squeezing range pre-flop. We had things again like big Broadway cards. He could even have ace-4 suited, ace-5 suited making this play. He could certainly have flush draws. And he could even have a pair lower than ours, like 7s, 8s, or 9s making this play. So we need about 40% equity here. I think we definitely have it against a range that wide. Now, if I was up against a tighter player and I thought they were only making this play with like a big pair or a flush draw, I would actually just fold my hand. But because I think this player has enough pairs lower than mine and suited aces and overcards that could just be spazzing here, I decide to make the call, and I'm fairly at the top of my range here, right? If I had jacks, queens, kings, or aces, it's very likely I would have 3-bet the button, and I don't have that many, pocket deuces or pocket threes, so like I'm pretty much at the very top, and this is a hand against a wild player where I think we just need to hold on tight and enjoy the ride. So I make the call. Turns out he was overplaying pocket 7s. We get it in, we stack this guy, and we win a nice pot. And I think all of the dynamics came into play here with just assessing our hand strength pre-flop, sizing up the multi-way dynamic, and then using position to our advantage. So I hope you enjoyed these two ways to improve your poker game rapidly between improving pre-flop and improving your multi-way skills. If you like this video, we have tons more content that I know you will love in our PTO Poker monthly membership. It is a great mix of private coaching, digital content, and a group community that I know you will love. If you like this video, definitely check out the membership, trial it for 7 days for free, and see if the content meets your needs. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more content just like this.